On pole position, it's Ayrton Senna for the 53rd time in his career.
Ayrton Senna, a controversial racing driver whose name comes up a lot these days, and it's unclear at the moment whether he should be held as the greatest racing driver of all time or one who is simply too good for this world. Hello and welcome back to Technically F1. This is the first episode of our new series called F1 Focus. We'll be focusing on certain cars and certain drivers, and we thought we'd start off with an excellent driver, Ayrton Senna. Although given a lot of credit these days for what he did do, maybe we should talk first about what many people don't know. Let's get into the story of Ayrton Senna. In any racing driver's career, you always look first at their junior racing career. For Ayrton Senna, he won the South African Karting Championship in 1977, and that was one of the big things that springboarded him into car racing. In car racing, he was quite successful, eventually winning a championship within that. Car racing is essentially the step before Formula One. Once he reached Formula One, he tested for many teams, including the very strong Brabham team, who had won the championship of 1983. However, Ayrton did not go to Brabham. He instead went to the new Toleman team, which he raced for in 1984. This year was his first year in Formula One, and it certainly started out with some incredible events, including his first podium at Monaco. Let's get into that podium. Senna started in the lowly grid place, below 10th place. However, by staying out of trouble and keeping his nose clean, he was already up into the podium places by the midpoint of the race. However, the rain was really bucketing down, and Alain Prost, one of the McLaren drivers, was asking for the race to be stopped by waving his hands around like crazy. However, on the lap that the race was stopped, Ayrton passed Alain Prost. Now, most would think that at that point, Ayrton had won the race. Instead, no, they actually took the classification from the lap before where Ayrton was in second place. However, before the 10th race of the season, Ayrton, a rookie, had a podium. Now, continuing through the rest of the season, it wasn't as successful as the Monaco race, especially considering the fact that the car that he was driving at Toleman was nowhere near the fastest car that season, and didn't have a very reliable turbocharged engine. And remember, this is in the era where massive turbocharged Porsche engines went up against massive turbocharged Honda engines, an era where a little team like Toleman could barely afford a turbocharged engine. For the next year, it was looking really good for Ayrton because he was going to Lotus. Now, why that was so great is because Lotus had a very powerful Renault engine, and although it wasn't the most reliable turbocharged engine, it was extremely powerful, but more importantly, it was competitive in comparison to the Porsche engine, which McLaren had. In his years at Lotus, he proved to teams that although he couldn't win a world championship in the Lotus, which wasn't as competitive as some of the other cars, he could win races, and this kept him on the radar of many teams, including McLaren. Wait, did I just say McLaren? Yes, McLaren, the people who had just got their butts kicked twice in a row by Williams. However, they now just had a Honda engine, which looked to be the missing piece of their puzzle, and what they really wanted was Ayrton Senna, and that's exactly what they got. Ron Dennis talked to Senna, and they were able to hire him. For 1988, that was his first season at McLaren, Senna was exceptional, winning many races and eventually the championship in a very controversial final race of the season. But he won it, and that was his first world championship. In 1989, he didn't win, mainly because he wasn't focused enough, but also because his driving style suited the old turbocharged F1 cars more than it did the new naturally aspirated ones, because he was just faster with the turbocharged ones, and he wasn't ready for the new naturally aspirated revolution. But in 1990, it all changed. But in 1990, he won it again! So that would be 2 championships in 3 years for Senna, which many people were touting him to be a person who would win more championships than anybody before him. And although this didn't come to fruition, he did win 2 championships in 3 years at the time, and that was exceptional. But it would get one step better. In 1991, he would win his 3rd world championship. He would beat Nigel Mansell, a Williams driver, in a car that was a little bit more than overpowered. It was unfair. That's how crazy that Williams car was. If you came up against it in a battle and you didn't have some sort of advantage, maybe tires, maybe fuel, something like that, you would never be able to beat the Williams. Now, in 1992, sadly, the McLaren wasn't good enough. Its V12 engine was too heavy, the car was too heavy, and it didn't have active suspension. Its aerodynamics had also fallen behind the Williams, especially considering that Williams' aerodynamics had been designed by the greatest of all time in terms of aerodynamics, Adrian Newey, a man who knows no bounds and has won more world championships in his cars than any other driver or designer ever. In 1993, the same process happened again, except this time the deficit to the Williams was even bigger because McLaren had lost their Honda engine and had a Ford engine. Now, this had pretty much set Ayrton's sights, on being a Williams driver. He had to wait, but in 1994, he got his chance to become a Williams driver. And it looked like this was where Ayrton Senna would win tons more championships. However, this is not what happened, and 1994 went down as a tragic season, not one that Ayrton won in. Now, a collection of factors led to Williams' 1994 lack of race pace. Main one was the banning of active suspension, a technique that they had used since 1992, and this technique had helped them have a more stable aerodynamic platform, essentially meaning that their car was easier to drive. But when Ayrton hopped in it, it was extremely difficult to drive. And the issue with having a difficult to drive car is that you're bound to make a mistake at some point. And Ayrton had not only made one of these mistakes, he had made two. In the first two races of the season, he had not finished the race, yielding no points. What that meant is in the first race, when he spun out of it, he didn't get any points. And in the second race, he was punted off by Mika Hakkinen, an affair that gives you no points. The next race of the season was Ayrton's final one. The San Marino Grand Prix is a track that has a lot of high-speed corners, and the cars themselves travel over 200 miles per hour on it. Speeds that sometimes modern F1 cars can't hit on tracks. So to have that in an old F1 car with very little protection is quite dangerous. Ayrton put it on pole for the San Marino Grand Prix, but early in the race somebody crashed. What this meant was there was debris strewn across the track, and Ayrton eventually got a puncture. What this means is that the car is harder to control and it bottoms out a lot. That's quite dangerous, especially at a high-speed track, one that you need to do a lot of turning at. Now, what was so dangerous about it was the fact that at the same time that he was getting this tire puncture, his steering column failed near Tamburello, a corner that is extremely fast and is taken at 200 miles per hour. Ayrton crashed and eventually died in the hospital, meaning that after 10 years of his Formula One career, we had lost Ayrton Senna, a man who most people considered at the time the greatest racing driver of all time. In recent years, people have been saying that Ayrton Senna's statistics means more than Lewis Hamilton's because Lewis is in the faster car or Lewis's car is harder to beat for other people. This quite simply isn't true. Now, for the angry mob that is standing outside my window right now, let me explain myself. Here we go. Okay, so Senna is driving in a car in the championship-winning years that is the most dominant in F1. For that reason, his championships are just as valid as Lewis Hamilton's because Lewis Hamilton is driving in the car that is the fastest. Now, there are some years where, yes, Hamilton's championships were harder to win than Senna's. So at times, Lewis Hamilton's championships are actually more valid than Senna's. However, you can't actually invalidate a championship. You can say that somebody should have won more championships. I say this about Kimi Räikkönen every single day of the week. But you can't invalidate somebody's championships, which is what a lot of people are doing with Lewis Hamilton when comparing him to Senna. Now, we have to remember that at the time Senna was racing, he was racing against some of the titans of the sport, Alain Prost, and especially Nigel Mansell. Now, it's pretty unbelievable to think that he beat Nigel Mansell in 1991, and I think that raises him quite high on my list of great F1 drivers. If I'm honest, he's not in my top 3, and I know another angry mob is standing on my window, but cool yourselves down, people. My top 3 is Lewis Hamilton, Kimi Räikkönen, and Michael Schumacher, and you can't argue. If you do argue, you can argue in the comments, but not yelling at me. Do not yell at me. Back to Senna, he drove some truly excellent cars. When I say excellent cars, I actually don't mean like best cars of the season. What I actually mean by excellent cars is cars that were technologically excellent. Some cars that were really pioneering in the sport. Especially ones like the 1991 McLaren, which had a V12 engine. It was a real step forward for engine technology. And also, when he tested the 1983 Brabham, he was testing the fastest turbocharged car until the 1987 Williams came out. That's something important to remember, that when he hadn't even started in F1, he was testing the fastest, or really second fastest, turbocharged F1 car of all time. Not a lot of people recognize that about Senna, and it's quite interesting to see that he did get these opportunities, although he didn't take them early on in his career. He did have these sorts of opportunities early in his career. Back to his death, I think it is the fact that we're all living in The Sims, and Senna was given to us for 10 years before his code was then deleted from the massive sim file. No, if you believe that, you're a bit strange. I think at this point it was just a coincidence that he raced in F1 for 10 years. I hope it is. If not, it is the strangest thing they could have done. I think Senna, if he was alive right now, he could give us a lot of insight on greatest driver of all time, especially considering the fact that he drove against Michael Schumacher. I would have loved to see what he would say about Lewis Hamilton and Kimi Räikkönen, especially considering that a lot of people hold them very highly in their greatest of all time lists. That is it for today's video. Thank you for watching it, and if you have something to say about Ayrton Senna, well, leave a comment. Hopefully the comment section actually works on this video. If it doesn't, I officially hate YouTube. And if it does, yay, YouTube has stopped demonetizing us. Anyways, thank you for watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.